a lot of groups of animals are having problems. We just heard the news about birds recently, right? Like, I don't even know how many declines in North American songbirds, and because we've got white nose syndrome with bats, and there's starfish wasting disease out on the west coast. There's all sorts of problems with all sorts of organisms. Amphibians, I think, seem particularly susceptible. We used to call them the canaries in the coal mine, right? Because there's something about their physiology. They're ectotherms, so they're really sensitive to kind of changes in climatic conditions and changes in habitat too. So you think about a forest environment versus a prairie environment, for example, and the differences in temperature and sort of sheltering effect of the canopy and increases in humidity and all that stuff. Amphibians are very susceptible to that kind of thing because they're an ectotherm. But in addition, they have these thin skins, which make them very susceptible to desiccation too. So they require, not only kind of what I think of as like macro environmental habitat conditions to be kind of optimal for them, but also microhabitat conditions. They need to be able to get up under logs or burrow down in the soil to seek refuge during the kind of hotter or suboptimal periods, and that's caused by their thin skin. And of course, their thin skin also puts them at additional susceptibility to things like pollution and some diseases that we talked about a second ago that are particularly important because of the skin structure. They have, life history strategies that tend to, a lot of them do, at least not all of them, but most of them have these life history strategies where they focus on years of low kind of recruitment, like reproductive failure, if you will, and then boom years. They have these boom bust cycles. They don't have these kind of consistent reproductive patterns. And, life history theory, like you think about an elephant, that has one baby, and then, that baby has a high likelihood of survivorship. And they exist in these very relatively stable kind of population conditions. Amphibians are the opposite. They have these wild swings. They can be thousands one year and tens the next. Because of this incredible reproductive potential, they can rebound very quickly. But if you don't have those rebound years, you're actually kind of it's a rather precarious life history strategy to have. So there's a bunch of different things that sort of predispose amphibians to conservation problems that I think are unique to amphibians, but the overarching issues, habitat loss, habitat degradation, climate change, pollution, invasive species, diseases, all these things that are affecting biodiversity generally, affect them as well, and often, in sort of specific and unique ways. Back, I'd say like 10 years ago, I used to think, truly amphibians are, probably one of the more endangered groups. But the kind of more I, become familiar with the literature and the conservation issues surrounding all these other organisms too, I'm less convinced that we have a uniquely kind of amphibian problem going on, and it's more of a broad biodiversity problem that amphibians are kind of like the first wave of, what I mean? Like amphibians were some of the first mass population declines were noticed in amphibians for reasons that weren't clear initially. When you have issues like the bison or whales or any of these other kind of issues where it's really obviously kind of human consumption and take are the clear reasons. It's not kind of, the conservation solutions are pretty clear as well, But for amphibians, a lot of these were enigmatic declines. We had no idea. Amphibians were disappearing from, pristine rainforest parks where there'd been no, excessive human activity that could possibly be responsible for these declines. So, but I think that was very startling for a lot of people, and it raised some concerns. But of course, now we're seeing the same kinds of things in bats, right? We're seeing diseases that are wiping out bat colonies that are, that really aren't. You can't pin there's no direct kind of human mechanism at play in that particular moment, just like with frogs. And so, yeah, they're again, use the term canaries in the coal mine, but then if you talk to a bat biologist say, well, they're the canaries in the coal mine. And you talk to, turtle people, they'll be like, well, they're the canaries in the coal mine. So it's kind of it's a bit overused at this stage. And then, of course, the true canaries in the coal mines are canaries, aren't they?